Before human beings ever invented money, they already had something that worked almost exactly like it. It walked on 4 legs. It ate grass and turned that grass into meat, milk, leather, and muscle. And best of all, it made more of itself. It was the cow. For most of human history, if you wanted to know how rich a man was, you did not count his coins because there were no coins. You counted his cattle. A person's entire fortune could be measured in the size of their herd. Cattle were food, they were clothing, they were labor, and they were a savings account that could walk itself to market and give birth to interest. And here is the strange, beautiful proof that this is true. It is hidden inside the words we still use for money today. Our English word, cattle, the word capital, as in capital and wealth, and the word chattel, meaning property, all come from the very same root, a Latin word meaning property counted in heads. When you talk about capital in the modern economy, you are, without knowing it, still talking about heads of cattle. The word pecuniary, which means anything to do with money, comes straight from the Latin word for cattle. Even the modern idea of capital itself is really just a memory of a time when your wealth had horns and a tail. So how did a single animal become money, become empire, become a god to some and a hamburger to others, and finally become one of the most world-changing and controversial foods on the entire planet? The answer is a 10,000-year story of taming a monster, and it begins with a creature that would terrify you if you met it today. This is the history of beef. Every cow you have ever seen, every gentle dairy cow, every fat beef steer, every animal on every ranch and farm on Earth is descended from a single magnificent and genuinely frightening wild animal called the aurochs. The aurochs was the wild ancestor of all modern cattle, and it was a beast. A large bull could stand nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, weigh as much as a small car, and carry a pair of enormous curved horns that could reach nearly 3 feet in length. It was fast, powerful, and aggressive. The Roman general Julius Caesar encountered these animals in the forests of Europe and wrote that they were only a little below the elephant in size and that no one who saw them could feel safe. For hundreds of thousands of years, herds of these giants roamed across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Early humans painted them on cave walls in awe. To hunt one was to risk your life. And then, around 10,500 years ago, in the region we now call the Fertile Crescent, our ancestors did something almost unbelievable. They tamed it. We do not know exactly how the first humans managed to capture, pen, and breed an animal that dangerous, but we know they did because the evidence is written in the bones and in the genes of every cow alive today. Astonishingly, scientists studying cattle DNA have found that nearly all of the world's domestic cattle trace back to a founding population of only around 80 wild cows, tamed in that one region all those thousands of years ago. Think about that. From roughly 80 tamed animals came the more than 1 billion cattle that now cover the earth. It is one of the most successful and consequential acts of domestication in all of human history. Taming the aurochs changed everything. Suddenly, humans had a renewable source of meat and milk that they controlled, that did not have to be hunted, and that could be bred, generation after generation, to be calmer, smaller, and more useful. Over thousands of years of careful breeding, the terrifying wild giant slowly shrank and softened into the docile cow we know today. As for the wild aurochs itself, the original beast, its fate was sealed. As humans and their domestic herds spread across the world, the wild aurochs was hunted and squeezed out of its habitat, retreating into smaller and smaller pockets of wilderness. The very last aurochs on Earth, a lone female, died in a royal forest in Poland in the year 1627. Her kind had walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years, and now the entire species was gone, survived only by its tamed and altered descendants, the cattle in our fields. Her skull still sits in a museum today, the last relic of the monster that humanity turned into a farm animal. and once that monster was tamed, it became the foundation of wealth itself. We already saw the ghost of this in the words for money, but the reality went far deeper. In society after society across the ancient world, cattle were the primary measure of a person's worth. Wealth was counted in cattle. Debts were paid in cattle. A marriage was often sealed by the transfer of cattle from one family to another, a tradition that still survives in many parts of the world today. In medieval Iceland, the law actually set the standard unit of value as a single healthy cow of a certain age and quality, and the worth of everything else, of horses, of sheep, even of a person's compensation for injury, was measured against that cow. The cow was, quite literally, the coin of the realm. This is why cattle were so often the target of raids and wars. To steal a rival's cattle was to steal their money, their food, and their power all at once. Some of the oldest legends and epic poems of Europe, Africa, and Asia are built around great cattle raids, entire wars fought over the theft of a herd. One of the most famous epics in all of Irish literature is, at its heart, the story of a massive war launched over a single prized bull. The cow was the first fortune worth killing for. And this is not just ancient history. Among many cattle-herding peoples of East Africa, such as the Maasai, a family's wealth, status, and security are still counted in the size of their herd to this day. Across much of Africa, the traditional bride price, the gift a groom's family gives to the brides, is still measured and paid in cattle. A herd is a bank, a dowry, an inheritance, and a mark of standing, exactly as it was thousands of years ago. In these places, the ancient truth has never gone away. Cattle are, quite simply, wealth on legs. But cattle were never only about wealth. In one of the great civilizations of the world, the cow became something far higher. It became sacred. In India, over thousands of years, the cow rose from a symbol of wealth in the earliest sacred texts to an object of genuine religious veneration. In a society where the cow gave milk, gave labor by pulling the plow, and gave dung used as fuel and fertilizer, the animal came to be seen as a kind of universal mother, a giver of life that asked for little in return. This reverence became woven into the deep principle of non-violence, of avoiding harm to living creatures. And so, the cow became holy. To this day, in much of India, the cow is protected and revered, and its slaughter is forbidden by law in many places. Stop and consider how remarkable that is. The very same animal that, in one country, is ground into millions of cheap hamburgers every single day, is, in another, a sacred being to be honored and never harmed. Few things reveal the strange power of cattle over the human mind more clearly than that. To one culture, dinner; to another, a goddess. And India was far from alone in seeing something holy in these animals. Across the ancient world, the bull and the cow loomed so large in the human imagination that they filled religion after religion. Ancient Egypt worshipped a sacred bull as a living god. On the island of Crete, young athletes performed daring leaps over the horns of charging bulls, and legend told of a monstrous half-bull, half-man, kept in a labyrinth. Ancient peoples across the Near East carved great bulls to guard their temples and palaces, and the image of a golden calf, worshipped as an idol, sits at the heart of one of the most famous stories in the Bible. For our ancestors, the cattle that fed them and made them rich were not just livestock. They were symbols of raw power, of fertility, and of life itself, powerful enough to stand at the very center of the sacred. For thousands of years, cattle were the quiet engine of civilization. And here is something people often forget. For most of history, the most valuable thing a cow gave you was not its meat at all. Killing your cattle for beef meant destroying your wealth, so ordinary people rarely did it. What they wanted from cattle, day after day, was everything the animal could give while it was still alive. Milk, to drink, and to turn into cheese and butter that could be stored. Dung, which was both fuel to burn and fertilizer to feed the crops. leather for shoes, armor, harnesses, and the very pages of books. And above all, raw power. Because a strong ox, which is simply a castrated bull bred for work, was the tractor of the ancient world. Yoked to a plow, a pair of oxen could break open heavy soil that no human could turn by hand, opening up vast new fields to farming. Yoked to a cart, they could haul loads that would break a person's back. For thousands of years, the muscle of cattle was the single greatest source of power on any farm, the engine that drove agriculture and fed the growth of cities. Meat was almost a bonus, the final gift the animal gave at the very end of a long working life. The cow was a machine, a factory, and a fortune, all wrapped in hide and bone. Wherever farming spread, cattle went with it. And then, at the end of the 15th century, cattle crossed an ocean and remade an entire hemisphere. Because here is a fact that surprises many people. Before the year 1492, there was not a single cow anywhere in all of North or South America. The great herds, the ranches, the cowboys, none of it existed. The Americas had no cattle at all. It was European ships, in the age of Columbus and the conquest that followed, that first carried cattle across the Atlantic to the New World. And in the Americas, cattle found a paradise. Vast open grasslands, mild climates, and endless space allowed the herds to multiply explosively. Within a few generations, enormous numbers of cattle roamed the plains and pampas of 2 continents. From the Spanish herders who managed these animals on horseback came a figure who would become a global legend. The Spanish called him the vaquero, the cattleman. In North America, that word and that way of life transformed into something the whole world now recognizes. The cowboy. The image is burned into our imagination. The great cattle drives, thousands of longhorn cattle pushed across the open range. The lone rider, the campfire, the endless plains. It is the founding myth of the American West. But strip away the romance, and what was it really about? It was about beef. It was about moving huge herds of an animal that had not even existed on the continent a few centuries earlier, to feed the hungry, growing cities of a new nation. The cowboy, that ultimate symbol of freedom and the frontier, was in truth a delivery man for the beef industry. And that industry did something to the American landscape that is easy to miss. When European settlers arrived on the Great Plains, those grasslands were already home to one of the largest herds of large animals on Earth. Tens of millions of wild bison, the American buffalo, thundered across the plains in herds so vast they could take days to pass. But in the 1800s, those bison were slaughtered on an almost unimaginable scale, hunted for their hides, for sport, and deliberately as a way to starve and break the Native American peoples who depended on them. Within a few short decades, a population of tens of millions of wild bison was reduced to just a few hundred surviving animals. It was one of the fastest destructions of a great animal population in recorded history. And what filled the empty grasslands that the bison had left behind? Cattle. The wild native herd was wiped out, and in its place, humans installed their tamed, imported herd. On the very same plains where millions of buffalo had once roamed free, millions of cattle now grazed under the watch of the cowboy. It was a swap of one giant grazing animal for another, the wild replaced by the domestic, and it reshaped the ecology of an entire continent. And it was in one of those hungry cities that beef would undergo its most dramatic and disturbing transformation as it entered the industrial age. The city was Chicago. In the second half of the 1800s, Chicago became the beating heart of the American meat industry, thanks to a place called the Union Stockyards. This was an absolutely vast complex of pens, railway lines, and slaughterhouses, where cattle from all over the country were funneled in by the millions to be killed, butchered, and shipped back out as beef. The newly invented refrigerated railway car meant that meat processed in Chicago could now be sent fresh across the entire nation. The scale of it was staggering, At its height, the Chicago stockyards processed many millions of animals every single year, so many that the poet Carl Sandburg would famously crown the city the hog butcher for the world. An entire district of the city, a place workers called Packing Town, was given over to nothing but the business of turning living animals into packaged meat. It drew in tens of thousands of immigrant laborers desperate for work who lived crowded together in its shadow and breathed its unforgettable stench of blood and smoke. Chicago had become the place where America's cattle went to die and where its beef was born. To handle this flood of animals, the meat packers invented something that would change the whole world of manufacturing. They built what could be called a disassembly line. Each carcass moved along an overhead rail, and each worker performed one single repetitive cut as it passed over and over all day long. This system of breaking a complex task into tiny, endlessly repeated steps was so efficient that it is widely credited with inspiring the assembly line that Henry Ford would later use to build automobiles. In a very real sense, the modern factory was born on the killing floors of the Chicago stockyards. But behind the efficiency lay a nightmare. The conditions inside these plants, for both the animals and the workers, were horrifying, and they were hidden from the public that happily bought the cheap meat. Until one man decided to expose them. In 1904, a young writer named Upton Sinclair went undercover in the Chicago stockyards for 7 weeks, living among the workers and witnessing everything. 2 years later, he published the result as a novel called The Jungle. It told the story of an immigrant family destroyed by the brutal, dangerous work of the packing plants. But it was Sinclair's stomach-churning descriptions of the meat itself that seized the public. He described diseased animals being processed, meat dropped on filthy floors covered in dirt and rat droppings, and rotten scraps being swept up and sold. He wrote of a world where the beef people fed their children was produced in unspeakable filth. The public was horrified. Sinclair had actually intended his book to be about the plight of the workers, and he was famously disappointed that people cared more about their dinner than about the laborers. In his own words, he aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, he hit it in the stomach. But the effect was undeniable. President Theodore Roosevelt, alarmed, sent his own investigators to the stockyards, and they confirmed that the reality was every bit as bad as the book described. The outrage was so great that within months, in 1906, the government passed landmark new laws, the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. These laws created the very system of federal food inspection and safety regulation that still protects consumers in the United States today. A single novel about beef had given birth to modern food safety. From there, in the 20th century, beef completed its final transformation from a symbol of wealth and a frontier adventure into something cheap, fast, and available to everyone. The rise of the fast food restaurant put a beef hamburger within reach of nearly every person in the developed world. To feed this endless demand, the industry changed how cattle themselves were raised. Instead of grazing on open grass for their whole lives, huge numbers of cattle were now moved into crowded feedlots and fattened quickly on grain, especially corn. The animal that had once represented a family's entire fortune became the filling of a sandwich that cost less than an hour of work. Beef had gone from the ultimate luxury to the ultimate convenience. This cheapness, though, was in many ways an illusion because it hid an enormous true cost. Beef is one of the most resource-hungry foods on the planet to produce. A single steer eats an immense amount of grain and grass over its life, drinks huge volumes of water, and needs a great deal of land. Pound for pound, raising beef requires far more feed, water, and space than almost any other common food. So while the burger on the menu was cheap, the real price, paid in land, in water, and in the resources of the planet, was quietly enormous. We had learned to make beef astonishingly cheap for the person buying it and astonishingly expensive for the earth producing it. But that staggering scale, The sheer number of cattle needed to satisfy the modern appetite for beef has come with a cost that we are only now fully reckoning with. Today, there are well over 1 billion cattle on planet Earth, an almost unimaginable multiplication of that tiny founding herd of 80 wild animals. And raising that many enormous grass-eating, methane-producing animals takes an extraordinary toll on the planet. Cattle ranching is the single largest driver of deforestation in the Amazon rainforest, as vast areas of irreplaceable forest are cleared year after year simply to create pasture for grazing cattle. And cattle themselves, through their digestion, are one of the largest agricultural sources of methane, a greenhouse gas many times more powerful than carbon dioxide at trapping heat. There is a dark irony in this. The aurochs was once a wild monster that humans feared. We tamed it, we shrank it, and we multiplied it into 1 billion gentle animals. And now, through sheer overwhelming numbers, that tamed animal has become a force reshaping the climate of the entire planet. We conquered the beast, and in conquering it 1 billion times over, we created a new kind of problem entirely. So think about the whole extraordinary journey. A terrifying wild giant, painted on cave walls, hunted at the risk of death. Tamed from as few as 80 animals into the foundation of human wealth, so central to our lives that our very words for money and capital are secretly built from it. Worshipped as a god in one land and eaten as a staple in another. Carried across an ocean to remake 2 continents and give birth to the legend of the cowboy. Industrialized on the killing floors of Chicago in a way that changed both our food safety laws and the modern factory itself. And finally multiplied into 1 billion-strong herd that feeds the world its favorite meat while quietly weighing on the future of the planet. For most of human history, wealth did not glitter. It did not sit in a vault or a bank. It grazed in a field, it lowed in the morning, and it walked itself to market. The next time you drive past a herd of cattle standing peacefully in a green field, remember what you are really looking at. You are looking at a tamed monster, at the oldest fortune humans ever owned, and at the animal quietly hidden inside the word we use, to this very day, for money itself. If this story changed the way you see that animal in the field, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories of the everyday world. Leave a like if you learned something new, and tell me in the comments which part of the story of beef surprised you the most. There is always more history waiting to be uncovered.